I do want to say, yes, we will be recording starting from now. If you do not feel comfortable
recording in progress,
we ask that you turn your camera off, but we will be recording and sharing with the folks who want this recording. I also want to preface this by saying that we cannot provide individual legal support or information during this session. Our goal here is to provide guidance on renewals. I hope that for a lot of the individual questions we have right now, that you will receive the guidance you need from Marisol and others on this call. But again, we cannot answer individual specific questions on this call. But welcome, Marisol. I'll pass it to you so you can introduce yourself and walk us through the next section.
So my name is Marisol from Make the Road, New York. I work as a lawyer as part of the immigration team practice. So thank you so much for joining. I can't give individual legal advice. I can only speak to like general legal advice, just because as lawyers we have like the vow of confidentiality, which means we can't discuss private matters with others, similar to like what priests have. Or medical doctors. So I'm going to talk about a few different things today, in addition to answering questions in the chat. The first, which we've already been seeing in the chat since we joined, is when to renew. And then I'm going to be giving some general advice on DACA renewals, answering questions, and also talking about advanced parole, what it is, and some guidance, and just talking about advanced parole in the future. Okay. And later on, we will have someone speaking about the DACA renewal fund. So I've seen some questions in the chat as well. I believe Ritu is going to speak on that after me. Okay. So the first thing about when to renew, I copy and pasted it in the chat. But here we have that basically USCIS, which is the immigration agency that governs DACA. If your DACA is expiring soon, then our advice is to renew as soon as possible. And then the other question we're getting is like, how soon is too soon? So USCIS itself has said that anything that is before 150 days, like if, for example, my DACA, I think 150 days from now, I just looked it up, is May 11th of next year. So if your DACA is expiring between now and May 11th, 2025, USCIS will accept your DACA application and is able to decide whether to grant or deny it, right? But anything, let's say my DACA is expiring more than 150 days out. So in this case, from today, it would be like May 12th. What it means is that USCIS will still accept my application, but it won't actually make a decision on it, right? So you'll get a receipt notice with a receipt number being like, hey, we received your application, but it won't make a decision, what we call adjudication, until it's within that 150-day period, right? So, I sometimes have people asking me, like, if my DACA is expiring like December next year, or November next year, October, September, anytime, more than 150 days out. But I tell people it's like up to you. You just have to understand that it's going to be pending for a long time until it hits that 150-day period. I hope that's clear. So basically, like, USCIS will still receive your application, but it's not going to decide on it if it's more than 150 days out. So I think it's up to you in that case if you're like, do I want to try to renew earlier? It's like basically you'll get a receipt notice, which it says, USCIS, we have your application, but you will not get a decision on it. And obviously it can be very stressful for people because DACA has been undergoing legal challenges for such a long time, through multiple kinds of courts, through the Supreme Court, which I know both me and We Dream have been, courageously and tirelessly advocating for DACA survival for a long time. And many of you on this call have also been part of the advocacy efforts to keep DACA going. And so I know that, in the past, it's always been this question of like, if DACA is under threat, does this mean, should I just like apply right now? Will it kind of save my spot in the future? And so basically what we can say is that, even though the future of DACA is uncertain, USCIS does have this 150-day window, right? Like where it will make a decision on your application with things if your DACA expires within that 150-day range. But if it's outside of it, your application will just stay pending until it hits that 150-day period in which to make decisions on applications. Okay, let's see. All right, and then I'm gonna go to my next point, and then I'm gonna answer questions because I think then I might get like lost in the sauce if I'm trying to do both. All right, so the next thing I wanted to cover is just like general advice on DACA renewals. Some of y'all may have heard of what is an RFE, so I'm just going to put the abbreviation in here, which is a request for evidence. And some of you may have received this from USCIS before. A request for evidence is whenever you send an application into USCIS, it doesn't have to be a DACA application itself, it can be any kind of application. It's basically USCIS saying like we need more information, or we have more questions, or it might be both, like we might have more questions or information that we need in order to complete your renewal. So some of the best practices that we always tell applicants or when we're helping do file renewals is to triple check it, quadruple check it, sorry I have to sneeze, like a million times, right? Just like make sure everything is in order, all of your documents are ready, because the last thing you want is your application either being bounced back because something was missing, or you getting a request for evidence, which is a letter saying like, hey, we need more information, hey, you missed something, and then that delays things. And obviously employers are not forgiving. They're just like, your work permit is expiring, I'm gonna have to terminate you, or if I need proof of your work permit by X date, and that can be very stressful for folks, right? So we always tell everyone to double check, triple check, make sure your DACA application is complete, that there's no typos, no errors, anything from like there was, you mistyped your name or your birth date was wrong and now your work permit's not reflecting like your real name because of like an accidental typo. USCIS makes errors too, right? Sometimes it's always not on our end when we're pulling them out. So that's one thing. And then another thing, something that we also flag to folks is payment. A lot of applications have gotten bounced back because of checks bouncing. Maybe there wasn't enough money in the account, or you were transferring between your savings and your checking, or maybe that account closed and then USCIS tried to cash in that check and it wasn't able to, and so your application gets returned, and in between the time of it getting returned and you sending out a new one, your work permit expires, and so does your DACA status, and that can be very stressful. Right. We also say this for anyone who is filing their DACA renewal application, instead of paying with a money order or a check, with a credit card. Sometimes your credit card, your company might have certain protections against like certain, account limits. Like if it's a purchase above X amount of money, it might flag it as fraud, or it might just like not recognize USCIS trying to make this authorization. And clients have gotten texts, from their bank, or just saying like, there was fraud reported on your account, and then USCIS then returns the application, and then this causes again a delay for you to get your work permit and to continue your DACA status. You can always call your bank to make sure if there's any sort of security features that sort of impede that, make it more difficult, has happened to you, has certain account or number limits, to make sure that's withdrawn.
While you paste that, Marisol, I do want to answer some of the questions around the litigation that is happening right now. One of the questions that came in is, do we have any hearsay or rumors of when to expect the Fifth Circuit decision? Unfortunately, we do not know when we would expect that. It could happen at any moment, which is why our encouragement is that you renew. So I wish I could tell you we're gonna expect it in Q1 of next year. We just really don't know when that could come. And the thing that we can do and the thing that we do have control over is when we renew. There's also questions around what will happen when Trump is in office. Unfortunately, we also don't know what the administration will do, right? We know what they've done in the past. We know not to expect anything positive from them. They were the ones who started this. litigation in the first place, right? So, which is why we're having this information sessions to equip you with the information to make the best choices for your individual lives, right? I know there's a lot of questions on like timeline. Our blanket suggestion is renew. If you're able to renew, file, renew, right? I can also ask some of the questions for you, Marisol. There's questions around whether you need to be employed at the time of your renewal. The answer to that is no. I'm seeing you shake your head.
So the question, sorry, is like, it does not matter if you're not working, like, or are unemployed and you seek a DACA renewal. I know when you fill out the work permit, the I-765 worksheet, it'll ask like income, expenses, and then it says like, if you may provide like a reason why you need this work authorization. I don't have like the form in front of me. That is optional, it's not mandatory, right? So at least in my practice, I don't fill it out because I never give USCIS information that's not required. So you don't have to, sorry, that was my dog coughing in the background. You don't have to, the I-765 worksheet, this is like the form, I'm just gonna type it here. It's the form that asks you, like, what are, no, the worksheet itself is not optional. Sorry, this is how misinformation gets spread, so I just wanna make sure. The worksheet is not optional. There's like a piece of, no, it is not optional. The worksheet is not optional. There's like, a part where it says income, expenses, and then there's like a little text box that talks about like, it's not required, but it's like if you want to give your reasons of why you want a work permit, right? That portion itself, like you don't have, I know some people think like I have to give a really long explanation about why I need to work, but that's optional. Okay, sorry. All right, so going back, we were talking about payments, making sure that your payment goes through because we don't want, oh yeah, online renewal. We've been seeing folks do online renewals as well. USCIS has like, this last year has really been moving more towards online filings. Okay, so then the next section that we're gonna go to is advanced parole guidance. So I'm just gonna copy and paste that as well, but advanced parole, I'm gonna use the abbreviation AP just because it gets repetitive, is basically permission to enter the United States, advanced permission to enter the United States after you've left, right? And I'm gonna talk about why that's important if you don't have what we call a lawful entry, and what are the bases of advanced parole, and also talk a little bit about what we anticipate could happen in the future, but nothing is for certain. I know DACA has been talking a lot about there's a lot of uncertainty, and so unfortunately we can't get like, I don't have a crystal ball and I can't do a tarot card pull on what's gonna happen, exactly, but we can talk a little bit about like what, as practitioners, we're telling folks just like to be careful about advanced parole in the future. But one more thing is before you do a renewal, is if you have any new arrests or any new convictions, to always disclose this information to an immigration attorney and to be cautious before you renew, right? Because there are certain arrests or certain convictions that can make you ineligible to renew your DACA, right? And that can, it's not a blanket coverall, like I wouldn't be able to be like, these certain offenses in X state, because each state has their own laws that are sort of apply differently, right? And in terms of like these federal definitions. But if you have a conviction, meaning that you were arrested, you went through a criminal court process, USCIS will want to know if you're still eligible to renew each time, right? And again, like if they're also, when you talk to an immigration law practitioner, if there were arrests that you never disclosed to USCIS in the past and come up for renewal, I would still caution you to talk to an immigration attorney to see, any past arrests or any ones, also if you have a pending arrest or arrest that has not led to a final conviction, I would also caution you to speak to an immigration attorney And in general, if you ever are arrested, our advice is always to seek out an immigration attorney in case, just because what you can then plead to in criminal court can affect your immigration status, right? That's like a whole nother subset. But anyway, so I'm gonna copy and paste this over here about advanced parole. So as I was talking earlier, advanced parole is permission, advanced permission that you seek from the USCIS before you leave on a certain kind of trip to be able to then enter the United States, right? And there's very specific reasons why someone can be given advanced parole. But before that, what are the benefits, right? Why would I want to get advanced parole? Advanced parole is helpful, right, if you do not have what we consider a lawful entry. So, for example, if you came with a tourist visa, right, you have a stamp that authorized you entry into the United States, right? And so the first step in order to later on adjust your status is to have a lawful entry. Unfortunately, if you entered the United States without authorization, for example, like through the border, without a visa or without permission to enter, you have what's called you don't have a like entry without inspection, so you don't have like an official entry authorized by the U.S. government to enter, which means later on when you want to become a permanent resident or a U.S. citizen, you need that entry, that lawful entry first. It's like the first step, right? So for example, if we have clients in the past that don't have this lawful entry, let's say they entered through the border and did not have a visa to enter, they would benefit from advanced parole because they would be seeking advanced permission from the United States, from USCIS to exit the country and be able to re-enter and then have like an official stamp of entry being like, hey, you're officially, you have an official lawful entry in the United States, which means this person can later adjust and become a permanent resident, and later on a citizen, right? So having this lawful entry is so important so you can be able to fix your status later on, right? Unfortunately, advanced parole is not for touristic reasons. So like if I want to travel, to see, let's say like I just want to, travel to Italy to drink a lot of Prosecco, that wouldn't qualify, right, as like one of the reasons for advanced parole. Advanced parole under DACA has these very specific reasons in these three big categories. One is humanitarian reasons, the second is educational, and the third is employment. And I'm going to go over each category. So, for example, I see some questions there too that I'll get to. So the first one is humanitarian, right? So, for example, we see this a lot with folks that have a sick family member. It can be a terminal illness, it can be a debilitating illness, just like a serious illness or an injury, and they will file their advanced parole on the basis of seeing this family member. My grandfather is sick in Mexico and is very ill, and I want to, say goodbye to him. Or my aunt, is getting, has her diabetes is really advanced, and I want to see her, and something like that. So it can be visiting a sick family member, attending a funeral, seeking medical treatment, right? So these are examples of humanitarian reasons. I will say that everything is discretionary, and so USCIS can determine whether to approve or deny this, right? In all of these categories. So for example, for humanitarian reasons, we always have people, like for example, if their family member is ill, we will ask them, if possible, to get documentation, right? Maybe it's a letter from their grandfather's doctor, maybe it's a letter from a relative, the caretaker that lives in the country with the relative that's ill, that can say this person is really sick, here's the medical records, or here's their prognosis, here's their diagnosis. If it's a funeral, a death certificate, or some sort of proof that the person has passed away, and the funeral is happening on X day, and so this makes travel very urgent. And then the second category we have is educational, which is like a study abroad or academic research. And then the third one is employment. So if a person can show that, their job is really needing them to like attend a special conference abroad, or some form of like institute of training, or has some sort of special project that their job like needs them to go, a letter from the person's employer for that training program, etc. Just like the future of advanced parole, which I don't have a concrete, like I said, unfortunately, I don't, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, right? We don't know what's going to happen with the new presidential administration. So generally, what we're telling everyone is consult with an immigration attorney before you apply for advanced parole in the coming months. Advanced parole has been in the spotlight before. It does have some, politicians that are, against advanced parole. We're not sure, what this level of hostility will mean for the future of the program for advanced parole. So unfortunately, we're not sure about the, the future of advanced parole, and if it, does come under attack. In terms of like risks of applying for advanced parole in the future, there's a couple ones, right? Like you could apply for advanced parole and it'd be denied, and then you wouldn't get your money back, and you could lose that money. And also, traveling outside of the country on advanced parole always has a risk associated with it, right? Anytime you're passing through like a port of entry, either through a border or an airport, carries a risk, right? So, I think anytime you plan on applying for advanced parole, our best advice is always to consult with an immigration attorney, not just for like help on preparing your advanced parole application, but also just like on general advice on like traveling abroad on advanced parole. Sometimes there may be new laws in the country that you're visiting in that you may not be familiar with, or even depending on the state you're from. For example, New York, THC, marijuana is legal in the state of New York, but it's not legal federally, right? And so, you might, if someone like, for example, takes gummies to sleep and packs them with them and would, God forbid, like go through like a port of entry, and that could be a huge issue, right? Things like that, right? So, I'm gonna, Daya, would it be better for me to respond to the chat questions in the chat, or should I go over them now? I just want to make sure we're like good on time. Like, what is best?
Let me read some of the questions out loud. I'll direct the legal ones towards you.
Okay.
So we'll try to answer as many, but I also know Ignacia has been helping us answer, and if there's some that we don't get to, if you could support. So some of the other questions that I've seen here, again, there is questions around what we should expect during a Trump administration, and when folks should renew. So what I want to say is that as Home is Here, our recommendation is that if you're able to submit your renewal application as soon as possible, that you do that. We do not know the details. There's no crystal ball we have access to, unfortunately, although the anxiety in me really wishes we knew. We don't know what to expect from the new admin. The only thing we have control over is renewing, right? So if you're able to do so, and we'll talk at the end of this, towards the next part will be about renewal support. We'll talk about potential places where you can ask for economic support for renewal. But that is as Home is Here, the coalition that has been working around the DACA litigation, is that you do that renewal. We don't know what to expect. There's questions around the forms. Have the forms changed since 2003?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I will say that as a practitioner, I always go on the USCIS website and make sure that the form is updated, because these forms do frequently update. Like it can happen annually. There's not like a set schedule of like when the form, like on January 1st it changes, but I would say like anytime you apply for anything for USCIS, go directly to the website and check, and on the top right corner it'll say like form expires, and it'll say like the month, date, and year. So In this case, it would be like the work permit form, the I-765, the worksheet, the I-765 worksheet that you would need to check. And if you're applying with a lawyer or with an accredited representative, you would file like a G28 notice of appearance, right? So I would say just like double check, because also like this information could be outdated, right? In a few months, like if there is a new update, just always check. Yeah.
Yeah, so always check the USCIS website to make sure you have the most updated information. There's questions around what happens if you lose your actual work permit.
Yeah, you can always apply to, I think replace your work permit, right? So there's a, like when you, there's a box on the form when you go to renew, it's like, I lost my work permit, or my work permit was like stolen from me. If it was stolen from you, I think we typically file like a police report or some proof that it was like lost or missing. Sometimes depending on like how much time is left on that work permit, like if it's not that much time, like we just tell folks to like file for a new one. But if it's like a substantial amount of time, you can. It happens more frequently than not, you know, like things get lost, you know.
Got it, thank you. And there's questions around the fees. Have the fees changed recently?
I believe the work permit fee went up in this past calendar year. I can't remember the amount it went up to, but I know there was a lot of forms with USCIS just had like a huge or just had a large increase this past calendar year. But I can't remember off the top of my head what the increase was.
And then there's questions around the processing time. In your experience, is the online processing time faster than the paper application?
With the online processing time, I know the benefit is like you will get like a receipt immediately. I haven't seen, at least in our experience, like big shifts between paper versus online, but that might just be like the amount of volume that Make the Road is dealing with. So honestly, it can vary. I will say like the perk to filing online is that it's slightly cheaper. All online applications versus paper, and USCIS have like a small discount versus paper, because they're really trying to move towards online filings, and you will get a receipt number, so that's useful, especially if you want to show that like your work permit is pending or your application is pending. Biometrics again, sorry, I'm seeing this question. Yeah, it depends. It's very at random, right? We get people that have, you know, renewed for forever, and they get called in to do their biometrics, and then we have other people that don't, and they'll get a notice that says like, we're reusing your fingerprints, we're using your biometrics, you don't need to come in. But we don't really, there's no like explanation as to why some people get called to go back for their biometrics and others don't. And then we always tell people, like, if you can't make your biometrics appointment, you have to like prioritize calling ahead of time, because getting a new biometrics appointment can be really just like annoying, like calling USCIS and getting a new appointment time, or like just like the last for it's just like, I mean, anytime I'm sure it's like anyone has called USCIS, it's such like a labyrinth to just talk to a human. You know, I just always say ask for an info pass is how I always like get the quickest way to a human voice, info pass, and like, you know, we'll get to a human person versus like being stuck in like a circle. Let's see.
There was also a question earlier around whether folks who currently have DACA are able to apply for other forms of relief.
Yeah, well, can you point me to the question? Sorry, I'm like.
Oh, it's like deep in the. I wouldn't be able to find it, but it was around whether folks could apply for U visas or other visas while they had DACA.
Yeah, we always tell everyone, like, when you go to, let's say you go to an immigration lawyer or like a nonprofit, Make the Road always screens everyone for any additional legal relief or anything, or we always ask about change of circumstances, because something might have changed in your personal life, or you know, maybe there could be like a new program or something that you might qualify for. So we always tell people that, like, when you go to see a lawyer, even though you're there for your DACA, you should be getting fully screened for any other forms of immigration relief, right? And, we do have DACA applicants that might have, other forms of relief and have been able to, file for their DACA renewal while also pursuing an additional form of legal relief. It's very common. Let's see. An average, sorry, if there's an average, sorry, go ahead. I don't know if you want to.
So I'm noticing, again, there's a lot of individual questions. I will say, there was a question earlier about like low cost legal support. I would encourage you to look into nonprofits in your area who are legal service providers. They might be able to support you in doing these screenings. We do suggest that if you are able to, that you go through some legal screening to see if there is other forms of relief available to you. Sometimes we just don't know what is out there, so it's always good to go through that. We also encourage, sorry, I think I was cutting off. We also encourage folks who are applying for advanced parole to do so with legal support, so that they will have legal support upon re-entering. But ultimately, we cannot answer specific questions about your case, unfortunately. Marisol, if you can support me in answering the questions that were left unanswered in the chat, that would be great. I do want to move us along towards potential support for renewing, financial support for renewing. But again, the last thing I want to repeat, and if you forget everything that was said because you're like, wow, that was so much information, I want to encourage you that if you are able to, that you renew. I'm having that conversation with my siblings to make sure that they're going through that process. If you are financially able to, renew. We do not know what is going to happen next year. The only thing you have control over right now is renewing and making sure that you do everything you need to get your application in. Right? We don't know what will happen in the coming months or in the coming weeks, but we want y'all to be as prepared as possible to have the best outcome come the new admin. Right? We do know that some schools and universities, particularly like the California school system, right, and other universities sometimes will cover the renewal application fee. So if you are in university, you are in school, we encourage that you do go talk to them and ask them whether they will pay for your renewal. The worst they could say is no, but there are places who already offer that. We also encourage you to ask your employer. Some employers will cover your renewal fee, so we also encourage you to have that conversation with them. Another place where you could look is your consulate from your country of origin. We know that sometimes they are willing to cover those renewal fees as well. So yeah, the Mexican consulate has been known to help. We encourage that you call those entities and ask for financial support as well. If you're unable at this time to get through the DACA renewal fund, we encourage that you ask your school, your employer, your consulate if they will be able to support with the renewal. There is also other nonprofits, so we encourage that you look up nonprofits in your local area who might be willing to support. Some of them are service providers who might also be able to support you with the renewal. Renewal, we understand that it is a lot of money, right? It doesn't come easy, and it's a sacrifice to be able to save the $500 plus $600 at this point, right? So just wanted to be able to share those other opportunities. Thank you so much to the folks who are also putting other opportunities in the chat for each other. That's how we support each other. That's how we get each other to the finish line to these renewals. So thank you so much. Catholic Charities is also a good place to look at as well.
So we wanted to share a quick update on the Kansas versus U.S. case, since that is a recent development. If you recall, the Biden administration eliminated the exclusion of DACA recipients to access the ACA marketplace. So open enrollment, which began in November, those who are able to use the open enrollment would have had access to the marketplace starting in January. However, litigation was filed, and as a result, on December 9th, a federal judge in North Dakota issued an order blocking certain DACA recipients and other eligible individuals access to the Affordable Care Act. But this injunction only applies for the 19 states that presented the litigation. So that is Alabama, Kansas, Florida, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Ohio, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. So it's only limited to DACA recipients who are in those states. We at NILC, the National Immigration Law Center, continue seeking to defend the Biden administration's regulation allowing DACA recipients to have coverage through the ACA. And we'll continue to be providing updates as things develop in the courts. This is a preliminary injunction. The case continues. So in the chat, my first resource that I'll share is the page that we have where we provide litigation updates on what's happening with that case. I'd also like to share resources to help DACA recipients make decisions that is right for them when it comes to renewals, and for them to have the latest information on what's going on with DACA. So the Home is Here practitioners group has developed guidance, which I'll be sharing in the chat right now, that helps people make informed decisions. So a lot of the questions that I was answering in the chat, the answers come from this document, right? When should I renew? Should I consider renewing early? I also saw a lot of questions around advanced parole, which you can look at the doc for more information. But ultimately, you know, if you're thinking of advanced parole, it's a good time to consider maybe the emergency advanced parole option, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But ideally, you speak to an attorney before you apply for advanced parole. And then once it's granted, you speak to them again to make sure it's okay. What are the risks and benefits of traveling at this time? And when you return to the country, definitely have an attorney on call, just in case there's any issues with reentry. But this document will have more information and more guidance on those two topics, on renewals and advanced parole. Then there's a lot going on, right? There's a lot of changes happening, and so I wanted to share the DACA litigation and policy timeline that we created at NILC, which gets updated whenever there's a new development. So some of you were asking, when is the Fifth Circuit going to issue a decision? When they do, we'll be sure to post. Also encourage you to follow MALDEF, who's an intervener in the case, who will also most likely be issuing a statement and other information once there is a decision at the Fifth Circuit level. Again, as I've said in the chat, we don't know when that decision will come. There's no strict deadline or timeline for the courts to act, but once there is movement, you'll be sure to see that materials will be updated. And then the last material I'll share is the DACA renewals calculator. So there are a lot of questions around, well, you know, my DACA expires on this date. When is the recommended window period to apply? So you can use the DACA renewal calculator to enter your dates. We at Home is Here do believe that if you have a DACA that's expiring within a year, you may consider renewing early, even if the calculator result says that you don't have to apply until later in the year. You may want to consider applying sooner than that if your DACA expires within a year, just because we don't know what's going to happen with the availability of DACA, right? We don't know if the decision by the Fifth Circuit could affect the availability of DACA renewal. We don't know if the new incoming administration can take action that can affect the availability of DACA renewals. So it's something that you may want to consider doing, renewing early, even if the calculator shows that you still have time before that ideal window period to apply. So I'll stop there and give it back to you, Dea. Thank you.
Thank you so much for leaving folks with links and resources that they can take with them. Thank you all so much for being here, for being informed, for going out into your community and sharing information. We will continue to have these information sessions. We'll have one up and coming in January, so please be on the lookout. When we know more, you will know more. We will make sure that you have what you need to make the right choices for your life. So thank you so much to Marisol, Ritu, Ignacia for being here. Really appreciate you, and Alex for moderating our chat. We'll see y'all next time. Bye, everyone. Have a good night.